Welcome back to the Gruber Company's podcasts. This is the Tesla Roadster podcast this morning. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning and welcome.
The image behind us is, again, artificial intelligence. And since this is the Roadster podcast, this was a prompt for a yellow Tesla Roadster in an architectural setting. And it's pretty bright anyway.
You know, in general, one of the better ones that I've seen. I don't see the roll bar though. They've got it set up as a true convertible car.
Yeah. It's been making that mistake on and off, but there's no gas cap on that side on the passenger side, so that's better. And it looks like we've got 3 louvers. So far, it's looking pretty accurate. Yeah,
pretty good. It's definitely a very nice picture. It reminds me of what it might look like with a Tesla Roadster driving across the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah. Good point. So we got a number of things to cover with you today, mostly Roadster related, and thought we'd jump right into them. The first one I have is on Facebook. Someone posted a question. He has a Tesla Roadster in Australia, Peter Danhue, and his question was on his 12-volt battery in his Roadster. That he got an error, auxiliary battery supply low, and he called the service center in Sydney, Australia to schedule a replacement. He said, first they responded with, we can't do this. After some back and forth, we can do it, but we can't get the replacement battery, so you have to source it yourself. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is remind Tesla that we have these 12-volt batteries in stock, and we can certainly sell them to them.
Yes.
He then he posted a link, and it was to a Katana motorcycle battery link. And, we solved this problem years ago. You can put a motorcycle battery into your Tesla Roadster, but the problem is it's only 8 amp hours. Now, what that means is your batteries are rated in 2 different specs or parameters. You have voltage, 12 volts, obviously, you need that. And then you have the amount of energy in that battery, and that's an amp hour. In theory, a 12-volt battery will give you 8 amps for an hour. That's where the 8 amp hour comes from. So if you have a trolling motor that draws 4 amps, you're going to be able to be on the water for 2 hours, right? All right.
Yeah.
Our battery is an electronic type application battery for critical power for UPSs. It's not a starter battery like this motorcycle battery. And the difference between a starter battery and the UPS style batteries or the critical power batteries is, this battery is designed to provide extremely high current during a cranking operation to get the motor turned over and started. Our battery is actually designed to give you a steady output and allow trickle charging, and it will operate at optimum performance in that mode. It's also 12 amp hours. So instead of 8, you've got 12 amp hours, which, why is that important? Well, for some of you that have done audio upgrades, for example, and you've got a bass amplifier and you like the punch of a rap session, right? This 12 amp hour battery will give you more energy and more punch, and you can feel that kick drum instead of an 8 amp hour battery. But the main reason is our batteries are completely sealed. They are also AGM batteries. And our battery is provided with a kit that allows you to do a conversion to fast-on tabs rather than the bolt-on. And Jesse, I've got a picture. If you can throw up motorcycle battery -2, I can show you the picture of our battery. And you can...
The fact that a Roadster doesn't have a starter means that all of those cold cranking amps, which it looks like on the battery picture, it was like 135 cold cranking amps. It's totally unnecessary.
Right.
And in fact, this type of battery is not necessarily well suited to something being constantly top charged. It's not going to be necessarily 24/7, but if the car's on, it's top charging the battery. If the charger's plugged in, it's top charging this battery. And our batteries are much more well suited to that top charging application.
Right. And that additional power that you get, that additional 4 amp hours, is definitely an advantage. Now, let's go to cost for a moment. That battery that you see up on the screen there is on our e-store, and we sell that for $44. Now, I can assure you, a company our size doesn't make a dime with a $44 sale because it costs us $40 to just process a sale with all the people that we have involved in an order processing function.
Sure.
This is a money loser for us, and we're doing this as a courtesy to the Roadster community. We lose money on every single one of these that we sell. If you can bring up another image, Jesse, it's called Motorcycle Battery, and that was the battery that was recommended by this customer, and apparently that's all he found. Again, if you go to our Gruber Motors website, there's a Roadster section there under our e-store, and a lot of these cool solutions are out there and available for you to purchase. That's pretty dark, isn't it? What I'm showing there is the 8 amp hour on that battery. It says it right on the front there. And I don't know how well our audience can see that. We darkened it up a bit to highlight that 8 amp hours, but that's what a motorcycle battery looks like.
Well, and the other thing about that motorcycle battery, it's not going to be $44.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Motorcycle batteries are notorious for being close in price to automobile batteries and even though they're smaller batteries with lower amp hours, and it's about the fixed costs that the company has, whoever provides the battery, of getting the battery packaged and put together and sent out for shipping. Motorcycle batteries typically run anywhere from $90 to about $150, just about like an automotive battery does.
So what we're saying is you get a better battery by buying our battery and a lot more power, 4 amp hours in addition to the 8 that you would normally get with a
that's right.
With a motorcycle
it's battery. A battery that's more well-suited, that it has more power available to it, and is going to cost less in all likelihood.
And for those of you that are mechanical and that do some of your own work on the Roadster, while you're in that e-store section, take a look at the battery relocation kit that we sell in there. And this essentially takes the same battery, puts it into a small enclosure, and if you mount this in the trunk of your Roadster, you will never have to take your Roadster to the Tesla service center to get a battery swapped again, which usually costs about $500-600 or so.
Right.
You pay that one more time by buying that kit, and then from there on out, you do your own battery swaps at $44, and there's even a meter on our enclosure that tells you when that battery is starting to go low.
Yeah, that way you don't have to wait until you're out and about on your Roadster and you climb in and you suddenly get the SWP aux battery supply low.
Right. We got a few questions. We might as well entertain those. Herbert Buder is joining us from Düsseldorf, Germany. Welcome again. And we plan on having a good discussion this morning.
Glad to have you here. On YouTube, George from the Watch Rich Rebuilds channel is here. He says good morning.
And then he also says, I can't find the Mr. Pete bobblehead on Gruber's website. We don't have that yet.
Yeah, we'll have to see about getting one of those.
We can source that, yeah.
You sure you guys want that, right? Well, I guess if our customers want it, that would be important.
Yeah, we got to start diversifying our merch game.
Yep. All right. So another item that came up this last week was from a customer as well. And he has a 2.0 Roadster, and it's been at a service center now for about 7-8 months or so, waiting for a part. And if you can bring up another image, Jesse, it's called HVAC blower. There are some parts that are in the Roadster that are custom and that were that are no longer in production. Back in the day, when they were able to buy a couple thousand of these, they interested a vendor in making these. But this product is the HVAC blower assembly that sits underneath the front hood vanes. And this, by the way, is a 1.5, but the 2.0 isn't much different. We're having a hard time finding this part, bottom line. And so is Tesla.
Yeah.
And who knows, this car may sit another year at this Tesla service center. Usually Tesla comes to us for hard to find parts like this. They haven't come to us for that part yet. But what we suggested to this customer is these things are repairable. The housing typically doesn't break. There may be some linkage problems. Well, we have a machine shop. We can refabricate things like mounting plates and
Yeah.
cable assemblies. And there's a 12-volt DC brush motor inside here. Well, that's going to have a part number on it, which is usually we can source that, or we can find a suitable replacement that fits into that particular space. And then you have a core in here, which can either be repaired or replaced. So the bottom line is we're able to rebuild these things. So if you send these types of parts to us, we'll rebuild it. If you're having something, or if you find something in your Roadster that is no longer available and they're struggling with trying to find the part.
You know, Pete, a couple weeks ago we were talking about even the ability to do 3D printing on parts. Don't you have a piece sitting over there to your right?
I do.
And this piece we have, there's a black piece that represents the original part, and the orange piece as well that represents our reprinted part.
All right, there's a good segue into yet another capability that we have. This is the Power Electronics Module Motor Mounting Insulating Block. And the original design is a black ABS plastic molded part. This part sits like this. There are 3 captivator nuts that sit behind inside the plastic. And like your electrical panel in your house at your service entrance where the circuit breakers are, no one goes back into that meter box. It's during construction, it's mounted, it's secured, end of story, right? Well, this is an insulating block that was never intended to have annual preventive maintenance performed on it. So when they torque these, the large bolts that go down to the 3-phase AC induction motor, because they have to remove the PEM and loosen these, every time they retorque, those square nuts in the back here put stress and pressure onto this black ABS plastic. Now, for those of you familiar with ABS plastic, it kind of turns into Bakelite after 10, 15, 20 years. It gets old, brittle, and these things usually crack and crumble. And when they do, you're going to have a hard time mounting those 3 heavy cables down to your 3-phase AC induction motor. This piece here already shows the stress cracks. There's one right there. When that would have gotten tightened again, it most likely would have crumbled and broken, and now you've got some difficulty mounting that large 0-aught stranded cable from the motor to the PEM.
And my understanding from what you and I have talked about previously is that this one is actually in better shape than most that you come across when you're doing PEM rebuilds.
Yeah, they're usually in pieces. I mean, you kind of have to have a basket to hold these things. So what we've done is we've developed a 3D printed version of this. It's much thicker. The other improvement is instead of putting self-tapping screws into the plastic, which again, you can do once, maybe twice, but certainly not every year that you have your annual PMs.
Correct.
We put brass PEM nuts inside the 3D printed block, which then gives it something solid to mount to. But the best part about our conversion is we got rid of the square nuts that go inside that plastic housing. We now have taken and opened that up, and what we do is there's a bus bar, copper bus bar, that handles hundreds of amps behind this, and we actually press PEM nuts into the copper bus bar so that all the torquing, all the strain is metal to metal instead of metal to plastic. So there are a lot of PEMs that come through our shop every month that get rebuilt. And whenever we find stress cracks or any kind of problems with these parts, we convert it to our 3D printed part. Now, that's one part. There's another one here, which is the DC input block. And I don't know if you can see how thin that is, but same problem exists there. There are large cables that mount onto metal plates that sit on this DC input block. Oftentimes, the technicians will use a socket that's larger than that little channel. They end up cracking it on both sides.
Sure.
And eventually these things just simply fall apart. There's some stress cracks on this one already.
And that looks like maybe 3/16 of an inch, or I'm sorry, an eighth of an inch.
it's actually, it looks like even less than an eighth of an inch
And
thick.
maybe as little as 3/32 of an inch is what I was thinking of.
Right, right. So again, 3D printed part. Much better, much thicker. Again, brass PEM nuts to hold the metal portions. We're not putting the screws into plastic anymore, which wears out. I mean, for those of you unfamiliar with that, you probably work with wood. You put a wood screw in, and if you put it in over and over again, like your doorknobs, for example, your door handles, right? That striker plate down below, eventually those screws get loose, and you have to then put extra wood in there, like toothpicks, to strengthen it again.
That's
the same
right.
thing happens with plastic. So anyway, those are some of the improved parts that we end up making for ourselves and for Tesla.
We know here in Phoenix too. If you have a storage shed, I happen to have a storage shed outside. Any plastic parts that sit for a summer, in that storage shed, you come out in the fall, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I forgot, and I left this part in the storage shed. And now it crumbles because that heat has just baked it. It's sucked all of the moisture, the oil, and the oil is all dried out on it. That's what happens with these type of parts with the ABS plastic, especially.
And they get brittle.
And they'll get really brittle. This type of plastic is not an ABS plastic, and will be less likely to get brittle over time. Plus, the fact that you're not stressing it helps it as well.
Now, someone might offer a solution and say, well, why don't you just buy some new parts like this from the original molds? Well, guess what, folks? With Tesla Roadsters, the majority of the original molds are gone. They were either scrapped at the vendors that used to make them because Tesla wasn't buying anymore. If you remember, they're 2,412 Roadsters, right?
Yeah.
Well, once that order was fulfilled, they put a few into inventory, but then they stopped buying them. And many of these vendors would contact Tesla as the years went by and said, we still have your molds. Do you want us to ship them back to you or scrap them? And either of those options were oftentimes selected.
Yeah, or you're a Taiwanese barbecue manufacturing company, and
you're out of business. Yeah,
you're out of business, and you don't care.
Right. All right. Watch Rich Rebuilds George. Is there a tracking number on the Chinese Roadsters? Can you watch it in Voyage? You know what? It's a great question, because about 45 minutes ago, I got a call from the sellers, and they updated us on what's going on with the Chinese Roadsters. We were suspecting that with this tropical storm going on, even if the ship arrived in Long Beach, they weren't going to be able to unload because of all of the activity there. I mean, sandbags and flooding and all of that. So the latest update is anticipating the storm that they were going into. The ship has been docked off the coast of Vietnam at this point, and the actual arrival date now has been shifted from August 26th to September 5th. We're also now speculating that even when it arrives, September 5th, assuming that the storm is gone, there's probably a backlog of things that need to be unloaded. And remember during COVID?
Oh, yeah.
There were miles and miles of ships off the coast of California.
As many as 40 or 50 ships sitting off the coast of California.
Right.
It takes anywhere from 12 to 24 hours per ship to undock them. They had delays up to 2 months at one point.
Oh yeah, 2 to 3 months actually. Remember, we had supply chain problems. I mean,
Yes, we
things that
did.
we had ordered were on the ship, and we couldn't get to our parts. And of course, that can be devastating when your supply chain shuts down partially.
Well, some of our AGM batteries for Gruber Power Services come from overseas, and we were concerned that by the time AGM batteries have to be top charged every 6 months, and we were concerned that by the time they got here, they were going to be overdue for a top charge, and that we were going to see degraded batteries simply because they'd been in the heat on the water for months.
Yeah. So the latest, George, is we expect the ship to arrive September 5th. And then we're still not sure what the delays after that might be. But the good news is the sea containers are on the ship. The ship is on the ocean, and they're going to be heading east to continue their trip to Long Beach.
On Instagram, BLACCARAZ, Black Car AZ, sends us a few lightning bolts. And good morning. Thanks for coming in and watching.
Awesome. YouTube, Trucker Alistair. Hello, Pete. Is your Röntgen vision better? It is, yes. Thanks, Mark, for your informative video on the Lucid. There you go.
There you go. Thank you.
I thought I was alone thinking the best for Lucid, and the best greeting from Portland, Maine. Quick update on the eye situation. I can't take off my sunglasses because that's inconsistent with everything that we've always done here.
That's right.
So otherwise,
That's right.
I would show you some red eye. But it went successfully. The following morning, it was cloudy the day they did it, and they only did one eye, by the way. But I got up Saturday morning, went out on a patio, looked at the horizon as the sun was barely hinting coming up, and I saw crystal clear horizon. So I knew that it was a successful procedure.
Yeah, that has to be. I'm very fortunate that I don't have to wear prescription glasses or contacts. It's hard to even imagine how nice it is to see something clearly after so many years of something being fuzzy.
Well, I don't have to ask you anymore. What does that question say?
That's right. That's right. The questions up there are still readable, but much smaller font, and we can actually get all the way on the screen with 4 or 5 questions now instead of having one question that rolls between a couple screens.
You know, we have flat screens throughout the office areas here. And a favorite trick now for the employees is they'll call me over and they say, okay, Pete, read that flat screen way across the room there. So I'm getting
awesome.
eye tests constantly at this point.
That's funny. We have from George again, a Roadster question. What is the Roadster trunk latch from? Is it like a European Renault or something like that?
You know, it's a Ford. And it's a Euro Ford. I forget the model of the Ford vehicle, and they are a bear to procure and get. I guess Ford stopped using them on these vehicles. We do have some in inventory. We are trying to source 100 or 200 or so at this point because Tesla needs some as well. But they are difficult to get, and again, that was one of the parts that Tesla actually did not try to make custom or need to because it was a latch assembly.
Right.
And they did what any smart manufacturer would do: is they go out in the industry, they take a look to see who's making that in quantity, who has the scale of economies with the product, and then just simply buy a replacement part, even if it has another name on it. And it does say Ford, by the way, on those latches.
Oh, very interesting, very interesting. You know, that's like what we're saying of Fisker. We have such respect for Fisker because they're contracting out a lot of the major components of their EVs.
Smart.
And we think that's a very smart move.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, the other question that was, or the comment that was made was, he enjoyed your video. Do you have any updates for us on how that's been going, the Lucid video?
You know, the Lucid video has gone really well. I know as of yesterday afternoon, I think we have cracked 5,000 views on the video now. So that makes it one of our more popular ones.
That was 6,000 something. Let me check.
Yeah, if you could check, Jesse. My being flattered is the fact that there are so many comments on that video.
Yeah.
And I take the view of it doesn't matter to me if the comments are positive or negative, and there's a mix of both. It's the fact that people thought enough of the video to comment on it in the first place that tells me, okay, we have an effective video out there. I'm looking forward to and continuing on another project that's going to be something along the lines of, revenue and stock price per square foot of factory space for several car makers, Tesla, Lucid, and I'm even going to go into some of the legacy car makers like Ford and General Motors.
Wonderful.
I think there'll be some very interesting information that comes out of that.
So we're at 5,989. We're almost there.
Okay.
Just at about
Almost there.
6,000.
And there are different size influencers in the social media space. And for us, 5,000-6,000 is exciting. But some of these guys, they get that within the first 2 hours of releasing a video. We're going to get there, and we're getting there slowly.
We're on our way.
Yeah.
Well, I actually have an update. Sorry. That 5,989 is in the last 48 hours. The total is 6,220.
Okay, so we're already,
so we have hit that number,
right?
And I have to say, I'm most flattered by some of the comments that I've gotten from some of the other influencers that are out in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
I did the research and came up with the conclusions based on the numbers that were out there. I didn't have a preconceived notion of what they were going to be. And most of the other influencers that had put out videos, they seemed to fall in lockstep with whoever it was that put out the first one.
Yeah.
Who said Lucid's about to collapse, Lucid's about to fail, the clickbaity type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And my view ended up being a very contrarian view as a result. And then I've got some of these influencers that are much bigger than us right now commenting on our video. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Flattering, yeah. The old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Strong Mint from TikTok. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. There's a delay on the Panama Canal, lack of waters, big traffic jam. Really? Okay. Well, we're not going through the Panama Canal, but...
Cyclone Hillary that came up through Southern California, these cyclones will turn, I think it's counterclockwise in the Pacific Ocean. And as a result, that will pull massive amounts of the seawater up into the Sea of Cortez, up north, and as a result, where's it coming from? It's coming from the Pacific Ocean, Central America side, which means that they could be having some low water issues that are just now getting solved.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Okay, TikTok, Van Goatwagon's back with us. He says, good morning, gentlemen and Jesse. Thank you. Welcome for, thanks for joining us.
Van Goat.
What about us over here, Van Goat? Don't forget about Richard and Aaron.
Richard and Aaron. There we go. Yep. These guys are doing some social media on-site stuff now. And for those of you that are interested, the Gruber Power Services podcast this Friday is going to show a event at a tunnel in Phoenix where Arizona Department of Transportation shut down half of that freeway so that we could work on an uninterruptible power system, critical power equipment that controls the lights inside the tunnel. We've got good drone footage, and you'll actually be able to get to see what one of our other divisions does. All right, so one other item that I have here is Neil Wise. He is in Collumpton, United Kingdom, UK. He has a company there called Wise EV Limited, and he works on Tesla Roadsters. So we were discussing this before this podcast. Europe has a lot more independent service options for Roadsters than the United States.
Yes.
Here there are a couple, three of us, and that's about it. But Europe has a much larger list, and Neil is definitely one of those that is very much appreciated. And Jesse, if you could throw up a picture here, it is the, let's see, I get the name here. It should be Wise-0, 1, and 2. And we'll show you what he's working on over there. One customer in the UK bought 3 Tesla Roadsters from Asia. And some of them were bricked and some are repairable. Anyway, Neil is tackling these and putting them back on the road, or attempting to. And these pictures will show the kind of progress that he's making. Right. There we go. And yeah, you can see an Arctic White Roadster there. Got the 1,000-pound battery pack pulled out. There is the back shot. And for those of you interested in seeing more, there are 19 more pictures here, as you can see. If you go to the Facebook site called Tesla Roadster Owners, and if you have a Roadster, by the way, feel free to join. We'll turn you into a member of that site. And there's always good Roadster tips on that site and a lot of communication between the members.
Mm-hmm.
There's another site as well, Tesla Roadster Owners Club, which has the same type of content. And in this particular case, you will be able to see these other 19 pictures that are out there and some of the magic that Neil is working. And if we can go to the other picture, Jesse, I think that one might be 0. Can't see the bottom of my... Okay,
Yeah,
so there's
there
the
it is.
battery pack.
I
Yeah.
have both of these two here with the guys.
There we go. Now, that's what you do after you successfully repair a Roadster. Not during, but after, right? So I want to make sure that this was a successful repair, and then the Cerveza came out. course, in the UK, they don't call it
Yeah, I was
that.
gonna say, well, that's the wrong.
It's the wrong country.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
And what is it? Is that your beer that you like? Is that the what do you call it?
No, the beer that I like
German
is a
one?
Bavarian beer, which is
Okay.
Hefeweizen, which is a wheat beer instead of barley. These guys are probably, I would expect them to be drinking Guinness, but they're not. It looks like a lager. It looks like a light beer. But whatever, beer is beer, and it's great. And so these guys look like they're enjoying themselves. Neil, by the way, is the guy on the left there. So, yes, for those of you interested in those other 19 pictures, Tesla Roadster owners on Facebook, and you can see the rest of the story.
Yeah, I love seeing what Neil has done here, and I wish that we could get more people in the United States. You and I were talking before the show, Pete. I
Yeah.
think there's maybe 3 of us, maybe, in the entire U.S., and the U.S. is bigger than Europe as far as landmass goes, almost the same size as Europe in terms of population, and we have more Roadsters over here than they have in Europe.
You know, one of the reasons, though, is there are more Tesla service centers in the United States because the density of Roadsters here is greater than Europe.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is
So,
true.
you know, it's very difficult for a manufacturer to support a service operation, especially for something like Roadsters. And that's one of the reasons that Tesla has been regionalizing and reducing the number of Roadster Tesla service centers that are allowed to accept Roadsters.
Right. I would hope that some of these other independent shops are working on other EVs as well as Roadsters. It's, you know, the entire global Roadster market, like you said, is only 2,412 vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's some less than that because of vehicles that have crashed
Attrition.
or
Yeah.
otherwise been lost.
Right. Jesse, I have another picture, service centers, which is a nice segue into this particular segment here. What we started to do on this Tesla Roadster owners group on Facebook is list the service centers that are able to work on Tesla Roadsters. A year or so ago, we had a customer that drove 15 miles away to their local service center with their Roadster, only to find that they were turned away. And they said, nah, you really got to go a couple hundred miles north because we don't work on Roadsters anymore. So I contacted Tesla Corporate, and they are working on creating a list that they can publish that will tell Roadster owners which service centers are able to take Roadsters. At this point, it's still fluid, dynamic, expanding, growing, and shrinking perhaps. So they don't have anything to publish yet. So what we did was on this Facebook site, we asked the Roadster owners to tell us what service centers that they've recently had their Roadsters at that were able to not only do repairs, but also the 3.0 battery upgrade. And this is an evolving list, so check on this periodically. This morning, I actually posted it. I pinned it to the top of the Tesla Roadster owner site. And if you look at the very top there, yeah, you can see the site that it's on. This may be useful, and it might help you avoid taking it to a service center that might turn you away and say, you really got to go somewhere else for this.
Yeah, I think of this information as useful enough that we could announce this every 1 to 2 weeks of what's out there, because it is just so useful for people to be able to know.
Right. And, you know, the final thing here is there are many Tesla Roadster service centers that are still able to do low-tech auto work. So if you have a tire problem, a TPMS sensor problem, or a preliminary diagnosis, it doesn't mean that you can't take it to these other service centers. But the ones that can actually then affect the repair and do a deep dive into your car, those are the ones that are beginning to emerge on this list. And as soon as we get the finalized list from Tesla, we will publish that on the site as well for you.
Right. I mean, for example, the TPMS sensor that the Roadster uses is the same as the TPMS sensor that the 2012 and 2013 Model S's use.
Well, be careful. You got the 1.5s and you got the 2.0s, Baylong sensors, and the other style.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it can be tricky. Let's put it that way.
It can be, and they've got that same thing with Model S's as well. You've got Baylong and Continental for the Model S's, and somewhere in around the middle of 2014 they changed, and so they didn't even change it with the model year on the Model S's. They just kind of randomly at some point in the year said, yeah, we're going to move this way.
And then one is self-learning. In the 1.5 Roadsters, you can put those sensors in the car, and the sensors will actually communicate and sing "Kumbaya, my Lord" and align themselves. In the 2.0, you
Yes.
have to have it programmed, and that's typically going to be at a Tesla service center because they have the tool. If you're going to Discount Tire, they're going to struggle, and they won't be able to do it for you.
Yes.
Good question here. George says, what do you guys use to pull a Roadster battery? Well, first of all, a Tesla Roadster battery. We had a picture up here earlier when the one that was being worked on in the UK by Neil Wise. They weigh 1,000 pounds, just barely under. And we don't pull it out the top. We'd have to take off, portions of the quarter panel. What happens is we have to take a bunch of stuff off the bottom, and then we lower it or drop it, basically. And the way that's done is we put it on a cradle, and you can see Neil here has this on a rolling cart. And you want to make sure that it's a cart that can support 1,000 pounds. In other words, don't go to Harbor Freight and get one of those inexpensive ones, because you may end up with bent wheels as you're moving this around, and then your
Right.
battery starts to tumble. And then the procedure is a lot of plumbing has to be disconnected, a lot of cables. You can see some of it hanging out here. And then eventually we raise the car and take it off the battery, and the battery remains stationary on the ground. Once you get this battery out, you can see that there are 11 battery sheets, and they're visible there. And if you look on the sides, you'll see that these were really prototypes that weren't quite ready to be released in the field yet, because the serviceability was somewhat questionable. And the reason I say that is they have components inside this 1,000-pound battery pack that takes hours to remove, things like fuses, contactors, circuit boards. There's a DC to DC converter assembly off to the left there called the APS unit. And not only do they bury that inside the pack, but they bury fuses inside the APS unit, inside the battery pack. So it's a challenge to work on these cars, and that's one of the reasons companies like us exist. It's not the sort of thing you can take to your average, neighborhood mechanic and have them be successful with.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of exactly what the Roadster is, a prototype car that had never been built before, where most of the major components had to be designed and invented by the engineers.
Yeah.
And they simply didn't think about, are we ever going to have to drop this battery pack and try to service it for any reason whatsoever? Their quick answer was, not really. And so,
as you talk to the old timers, there was a bit of contention there in the old days. There were a few people that recognized if this car is going to survive into the future, it should be more serviceable. But then, of course, you had the other faction, which was the engineers and accounting, which had enormous pressure to get these cars into the hands of owners so the company could remain viable.
right.
And of course, we're very happy that that took place, because the Tesla Roadster arguably started the EV revolution. It wasn't the GM EV1. There was a decade or more before that car disappeared. And it wasn't the T0, which they built 3 of.
And it wasn't even the Nissan Leaf, because the Nissan Leaf came out actually after the Tesla Roadster by a year.
Yep. And it was a Tesla Roadster that woke people up to the fact that electric cars are cool. It's sporty. It's a 2-seater. It's brightly colored. And you can go 200 miles, which was a big problem with some of these earlier EVs. You know, the T0 went 80 miles. The EV1 was, I think, 60 or 70.
Yeah, even the Leaf was only 90 miles, and it looked kind of like a tin can on wheels, honestly.
Almost like a Prius, right?
Almost like a Prius, yes.
So yeah, we're very happy that Tesla hung in there, and continued to work through all of those scary days of potential bankruptcy, and get a product out there that may not be the most serviceable product in the world, but it made it into the market. And the owners, by the way, well, as you know, this is a Roadster podcast. The owners love these cars.
Oh yeah, there's so I've never seen a group of people more passionate about their cars than the owners of these Tesla Roadsters.
Yeah, when the other sexy cars show up at our service center, the Model X, S, Y
Yeah.
customers, You don't get that level of excitement. But a Roadster owner, completely different story. Talked to one in Sedona yesterday, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
He's a musician. He wants to upgrade the audio system in his car, and he said something like, this car is my second life. He says, I love this car. Now, my wife's standing here, so I have to say that I love Betty just as much, but this car does everything for me, and it's almost a daily driver for him. But yeah, you don't get that typically from a Ford, Chevy, or some of the other Tesla vehicles. All right, we've got an Instagram comment. Rojo Sub says, thanks for sharing. And he gives us a round of applause. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And George also has a question for you, Pete. He says, does Marg look more handsome since your eye surgery?
Of course he does. Yes, I couldn't see him well before.
That's right. Then Van Gogh asks us, what repair or service is Gruber Motors most common?
Oh, okay. Well, with a Tesla Roadster, it is battery work. And then the second most popular one is the power electronics module. There's a design flaw in the Roadster, unlike later model Teslas, that if you don't charge it for a couple of months, it goes into a coma and you can't wake it up anymore at the customer's house. It gets what's called bricked, which, by the way, now is becoming an industry term. I've heard other manufacturers talk about dead electric vehicles, calling them bricked.
Yes, that's becoming a thing. It's becoming a general term for an EV battery that is discharged to a level that it cannot charge by normal means from the car.
And we think it came from the Tesla Roadster, which has 99 bricks, which is a collection of 69 parallel-mounted 18650 cells. And that brick is where we think it came from, because when you have a dead Roadster, you typically have dead bricks or bad bricks.
Yeah, and the bad bricks, just the shortcut was to say it was bricked.
Yeah. So what's most common? Well, the batteries, because when they get bricked, the customer has no option. And we can't effectively fly there and do a recovery in their garage, at their home.
Right.
It's a multi-day process oftentimes. The second one is the power electronics module. Now, what we're talking about here is a thing that weighs about 100 pounds. It's a three-phase inverter. It converts all that DC to three-phase AC to drive the three-phase AC propulsion motor. And it has a bunch of parts in it that are beginning to wear out. There are 21 electrolytic capacitors in there that are 8 years beyond their lifespan, 7 to 8 years, because the lifespan of an large electrolytic cap is about 8 years. In the critical power world, the customers routinely, proactively replace their capacitors in their critical power equipment every 8 years.
Yes.
For that very reason. So in this PEM, you've got old caps. I just saw a Facebook post, by the way. This was from a vendor that doesn't believe in changing capacitors, that found a PEM that had a blown capacitor in it. And, welcome to our world. That's
Right.
the end result. And you don't want a capacitor blowing inside your power electronics module, because it's basically an almost sterile environment, completely sealed with high-level electronics and power electronics in it. And when you get something like a capacitor blowing up, you send shrapnel throughout the PEM. And oftentimes that's conductive, and now you're starting to affect circuit boards, which are no longer in production.
Right. Even if that capacitor, because these are all oil-filled capacitors as well, and if some of that oil hasn't completely evaporated off, you're getting that greasy, oily mess, which is conductive across all your boards, and it's spectacular and not in a good way.
Mm-hmm. So that's the second reason, or the second reason cars come our way, is because they have a problem in the electronics, and it's not always in this big 100-pound three-phase inverter. There are other modules in the car. There is a switch pack. There is a VMS module. There are key entry security modules. And any one of these, because they have electronics in them, and these Roadsters are typically now 15 years old, are beginning to fail.
Yeah.
The work that we do and spend a lot of time doing is reverse engineering, developing schematics, test points, and even test equipment to keep these original parts in the car alive, because no one's ever going to be able to make these parts again in any reasonable, cost-effective attempt.
It reminds me of what goes on in the ice world with classic cars today. If you have, it's not so much the 1960s style classic cars, but the 1930s style classic cars. A lot of those parts are no longer made because the cars are so old and there are so few of them. The difference is, if I have an old 1930s or 1927 or something like that Model T, and I need to engineer something, I can go to a machine shop down the street, tell them my specs, and they're going to machine out whatever part I need. You can't go down the street to an electronics shop and say, hey, I need to get this circuit board.
Right. And, the same with the machine shop. When they make one of something, that cost just went astronomically higher than the original gear or part.
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
All right, Instagram, BizWyit1_Nayak. He says, hello, sir. I am a computer science engineering graduate. Want to learn about electric vehicles and what I can contribute to the emergence of this future. Well, my first advice to you is, and recommendation is, you chose the right educational path if you're going to be working on electric vehicles. Computer science, engineering, that's where it's all going to go. As these cars have less and less mechanical product in them, low-tech auto basically, it's going to be far more important to work on these cars to have skills like software and electronics background. As far as how to get into it, I would say polish your resume and start applying to the OEMs, the Rivians, the Lucids, the Teslas. And if you can land a job, even in the parts room to start, and you demonstrate competence, and we've been employees for 40 years.
Yeah.
We do not squash or ignore talent. When we find somebody that is talented, that has a lot more potential, those people move quickly through an organization like ours.
Oh, absolutely.
So, that would be my recommendation. Get a job with an OEM, and you can chart your path from there. And then the final thing, we talked about this yesterday and lost a subscriber over this. Don't try to work 32 hours a week.
Yeah.
Work on your career. And even if it's a 40-hour-a-week job, when you go home at night, educate yourself, study, get involved in forums, look at what other people are doing, and continue on this quest. And you, sir, will be very successful.
I'll use the same quote that I used yesterday from Warren Buffett. The one thing that it's inflation proof and it's economic recession proof is yourself and your skills. As inflation goes up, your skills stay there and they're just worth more. As when a recession hits, if you continue to increase your skills, you're going to move ahead of those people that are moaning and groaning. Then, oh, the world is so hard, and so you're on the right path. If you need to have a specific software guidance or experience, virtually every automaker has Linux as the operating system for their CAN bus and for their cars. Tesla's no different from that. My understanding is that Lucid is also no different than that. I know the major auto manufacturers are the same.
Question from YouTube. George says, where are the circuit boards coated in the Roadsters located, I think is what we're saying. Because there is a coating on the boards to protect them from moisture. Meaning like clear. Oh, he does mean coating. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's saying, were the circuit boards coated in the Roadsters?
Absolutely. Yes. And that's part of the issue that we have when repairing them. You have to get that layer off in order to reach test points. It's called conforma coating, by the way, and it came out of actually mil-spec. The military never knew what kind of environments their electronics were going into. Guam, for example, is highly humid, or on ships where you have salt spray. So these electronics typically were coated with a conforma coating, which prevented any kind of moisture ingress.
Okay. On Facebook, Ross Couples has a comment for us and a question. I've just acquired Model S Founders number 9, which is showing the charge capacity reduced message. I think that's the BMS U029 message.
Yeah, yeah.
Assuming that it needs battery repair, do you have thoughts on going with either a new Tesla pack or other repair options as far as the collectability of the car in the future? Great question there. He says, I appreciate your thoughts.
Congratulations, by the way, on actually being able to get not only a signature Model S, but a Founders series and that low of VIN. We have Founders Model S number 3 currently in our service center, which is for sale, by the way. And one of the noteworthy things about that car is it's got some panel gaps. And we approached the customer at one point and said, do you want us to fix those? And we both agreed that because of its collectability, that's part of its provenance.
Yeah.
And if you're curious what the panel gaps are about, Ross, we had the first technician actually at Tesla here on a podcast about fall of last year. And I asked him that very question, and he said, well, there's a backstory on that. When the Model S was first coming out, we needed punch presses to punch them or to stamp the metal. And this engineer came from the steel world, which of course most cars are,
Right.
built out of steel.
Right.
Well, the Model S is aluminum, and you need a different type of press in that. Aluminum relaxes after it's been punched or pressed. And they had to get rid of all of the old punch presses and get a different set. So many of the original cars have those panel gaps, and I would suggest you just leave those alone rather than try to get those fixed. But to get back to your other question, what happens to the collectability of a car like this if you have a battery problem? The first thing is, yes, the battery can be fixed by a company like us, but it's going to go bad again at some point when you reach end of life with that battery pack.
Mm-hmm.
Like any collectible car effort, there are certain components in those cars that are acceptably replaced. Tires is the obvious one. Brake pads is yet another one. Suspension components, bushings, rubber parts, hoses, those are acceptable replacement items. Where you begin to cross the line with the ice world cars is if you do replacements like an engine and you put in a higher performing crate engine rather than the original numbers matching engine block. Even though it's a lower performing type engine, it is far better to leave that in the car because now everything is in alignment. Even your transmission,
Sure.
Get that rebuilt rather than replacing it. So a new battery in your car, I do not believe is going to affect its long-term collectability because you're going to have to change that battery at some point in the future anyway, and it is considered a consumable type item.
Yeah, I believe even on the hoses, when possible, the hardcore collectors will try to find the same brand and fit of hose, but they will go and get the new hoses because they're wear components. And if you think of a battery as a $20,000 hose, you're kind of it's a lot closer to that than it is to replacing an engine.
Yeah. By the way, that Founders number 3 Model S that we have in our service center has a matching Founders number 3 Tesla Roadster that is being sold as a set, and they're virtually the same color. One is radiant red, which is kind of a maroonish red. The other one is the signature red, which is, of course, a similar color. I'd be curious, Ross, what the color on your car is. It's probably a signature color. If you could let us know, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, and thanks again for that excellent question.
So we had a customer in Texas that just got his 3.0 Tesla Roadster battery replaced. And he was asking about the kind of range that he should be expecting from this new battery pack. The current range that we're seeing is around in standard mode, by the way, not range mode or full charge.
Mhm.
Standard mode is about 80% charge in a Roadster, is about 225 to 230 miles. And a full charge, which he attempted to do, went up to about 260. So anyway, if you're curious, he said 260 was the full range charge. And of course, you don't want to do that continuously because that's what wears the batteries eventually.
Right. The type of lithium ion battery cells that are used in the Roadster are not the lithium iron cells that can take 100% charge every time and not degrade. These are the more traditional lithium ion cells with the wet electrolyte, and their ideal is to charge to about 80 to 90%. If it's in a Model S, Tesla will recommend 90%. If it's the Roadster, they recommend a standard charge, which ends up being about 80%.
Now, this particular customer, it looks like waited about 9 months for his replacement battery pack. And we're hearing lead times on these replacements of about 6 months to a year. And another important factor here is Tesla is still not accepting elective Roadster battery replacements or requests for. What they're doing right now is clearing a backlog of vehicle off the road, as they call it, VOR Roadsters, dead Roadsters, solid brick Roadsters. Now, that doesn't mean that you should let your Roadster brick and then wait 6 months to a year, because you won't be able to drive it for that period of time, although you will be eligible for the queue in that you have a dead Roadster eventually. So anyway, that's kind of the current situation with the availability of the R80 packs, as they call them. The 80 comes from 80 kW versus 53 kW in the Tesla Roadster. All right.
What other questions do we have, Richard? I think I see some coming up on the next page, but we can't scroll down to see them quite yet. Justin Lee to Hugh, CLE to HOU. On Instagram is with us today. Welcome. He says the motor will not last forever either.
Yeah, good point. You've got a 3-phase AC induction motor, although so far those have been the most reliable motors that I've seen. I mean, compared to industrial type motors, which are also 3-phase. You have them on your evap coolers, you have them on your large commercial AC systems, you have them on blower motors inside computer rooms for the crack units, the computer room AC units. And, those motors don't last as long as the motors in these cars.
I know that, I still have a 1974 Craftsman air compressor with a little, just a 2-phase motor. Mm-hmm. And it just runs, it just goes. So these motors can last for decades.
Yeah.
And we've heard anecdotally reports of Teslas that have gone as much as 400 to 700,000 miles and not needed a motor replacement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, there were the early problems in the Tesla Model S, the bearing problems, the coolant leak type problems. But once those got resolved, I expect these motors to be as reliable as what we have in the Roadsters today.
I think so as well.
Question, from George, YouTube, did the Roadster come with air conditioning? It absolutely did. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly the most stellar air conditioning, and the reason I can safely say that is I am the designated test driver, so I drive about 2 to 3 Tesla Roadsters per week. And when when we had our heat wave, where it was 110 for over a month and a half or so, what the Roadsters would do is, first of all, there wasn't a lot of cooling in the cabin when it's 115 out, and you're sitting on top of asphalt, which is also superheated at that point. But then eventually what would happen, the battery is far more important than the occupant in the car. So the firmware at some point decides, you know what, I need to cool my battery, and I don't care if you're going to get hot in that cabin. They should put a little beep on there and say, roll down your window now, because it'll suddenly get very humid and hot in that cabin. It does have air conditioning. One of the things that we do well is we have a STP HVAC machine, which is almost automated. I mean, literally, they can plumb this thing up to the car. They dial in its parameters, and it is our 134A, by the way. It replaces the lubricant, and by the time that machine gets done, we take those Roadsters out, and it's blowing nice and cold air.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm glad that you brought that point up. This is true for the Model S as well. If there is a choice between the occupant in the car and the battery under the car, the battery always gets preference.
It's far more important. It's because you don't self-ignite and, burn up a car.
That's true.
You
I have
just get
not.
mad and,
I have not heard of a human spontaneously combusting in the recent past.
Yeah. It looks like Ross came back from Facebook. He says, yes, he's got Founders Model S number 9. It is a signature red. All right, that's what we have. Black interior. This one's beige with red piping. 7-passenger performance. Yeah, those are cool cars. You need to hang on to that. That is going collectible fairly quickly.
Very much. Congratulations on your purchase, Ross. That is that's a beautiful sounding car.
We have a comment from YouTube. It's George. He says, what is that banging in the background? Is Jesse building something? Well, our studio here is downstairs in one of our commercial buildings, Building C. And here comes Jesse. Pete, we got to build that studio.
We need our soundproof studio built out.
Thanks, George. You got him going. But anyway, what you're hearing is the sound of product going out. They're building pallets. They're shipping out critical power equipment. And, it's the sound of money, basically.
Pretty much. Every few weeks they go and in bulk they'll build their pallets. I think between yesterday and today I see 40 or 50 new pallets go up in the yard, and already some of those pallets are filled with product on their way out the door.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we got yesterday, and this happens quite often actually, we have a user group that is coming to Phoenix for a meeting. And they want to see the Gruber Motor Company service center of the future. And this is an executive group, apparently. They are in the remanufacturing sector. And my point in bringing this up to you is this is a fairly common occurrence. On any given day, we give at least 1, sometimes 2 tours per day, because people enjoy seeing what an auto shop of the future is beginning to evolve into and what it looks like. The comments that I typically get as we take them through, oh my God, these cars have license plates from all over the United States. The Roadsters come from all over, even Canada, actually. There's another one coming in from Canada now. The next thing they comment on is these floors are immaculate. There's no grease, there's no oil, they are super clean. And then, of course, this is a testament to the experts that we have over there, our staff, who keep things extremely well organized and clean, and keep it looking pristine. And then finally, whenever we build out a building, and we tend to grow by buying commercial buildings. We have 7 of them in the neighborhood now. And the first thing we do is improvements. We don't allow any gray block walls to exist inside the building. They all get primed, holes are filled, and then a pure white coat is applied, which really adds to the brightness inside a building, which improves safety factors, especially in an auto shop. You can see better. You're going to be operating much safer. We then do skylights. We bring in natural light. We put in LED lighting, and I think we have over 200 of them in the Gruber Motor Company service center.
I think it's about 240 LED lights, as well as 9 or 10 skylights.
12 actually.
12 actually, okay.
We put 12 in. And then, of course, a lot of other improvements. The warehouse doors typically get replaced. Those get beat up as the years go by. And then we have protocols in place that tend to keep it that way. And what happens is, this is my finding as a manager, once you instill that kind of pride in your facility, that migrates through osmosis to the employees, raises the bar for performance.
Yeah.
And that's why oftentimes you'll see a master mechanic over there pick up a mop and start mopping an area to make it look pristine again.
By all means. By all means.
So anyway, those of you interested in touring an auto shop of the future like this, it's free. I personally go over for the majority of them, and I can take you through the whole process, showing you the evolution of what it takes to fix an electric vehicle from the old Tesla Roadster to the later models of Tesla. All right. And someone pointed out, the buildings are so bright that you guys need to wear sunglasses. Of course, there's yet another reason.
That's another reason. Yeah, that's we had gotten to the point where our sunglass Reasons, we're kind of getting recycled. I hadn't heard a new one recently. That's a great new one.
It is.
Speaking of sunglasses, get a little plug here. We do have our sunglass cases for those who have not seen it just yet, available on the
You need to
Gruber
keep
Motor-
it back by your face. That's out of focus.
in order. It's on the Gruber Motor Company website. Now that it's in focus,
There we
Can I
go.
see it?
I can see it.
beautiful.
Yes.
Yep, looks
Right.
good.
There we go. All right, check them out. Use code Richard.
Perfect. So I've got something else for you. There are a lot of innovators in the Tesla Roadster space, and partly because an absence of continued innovation going into the Roadsters. Remember, Tesla's moved on. They're supporting their Roadsters still, but there's not a lot of new development taking place. So what has happened in the Roadster community is there are a number of people that are continuing some of this type of innovation. And one of them that I want to give a shout out to this morning is Marco Nolte from Germany. Marco is someone that we worked with in 2017 when we were buying flood damaged Tesla Model S's. He has a full-time job, but despite that, he helped us work in the MCUs, in the CAN signals, and in Linux, helping us get these cars reprogrammed and back on the road. Well, Marco is back in the news now. He has a couple of Tesla Roadsters. And Jesse, if you can throw up a picture, it is in a folder called New Roadster Battery. I gave you guys a clue what's coming up here. Let's bring up picture number 1. For those of you that have been with us for a while, you saw that Tesla Roadster 1,000-pound battery. This is what Marco has developed. He basically made a frame that replicates the dimensions of the existing ESS pack made by the Thailand barbecue manufacturer back in the day.
Yes.
And what he's put in here was a Porsche battery pack, a Porsche Taycan module set. And, part of the challenge with doing any kind of replacement battery for the Roadster, and we've attempted it ourselves, is the limited footprint that you have. And so anyway, there's some space here, as you can see, but the density of these hopefully is going to be as good or maybe even better than the original battery packs. So the story that he sent us was that he had an incomplete damaged Roadster 2.5 in his workshop for the past 4 years, and he thought that this would be a great project since he didn't have a battery for this Roadster. So he started building his own. It was a combination of taking measurements, CAD design, welding, assembly, and the structure and the modules are now in place. He also has begun to get into the firmware, and this is the next challenge. The low-tech portion of fitting something up in that Roadster, finding batteries that would fit into there, welding and creating the right mounting structure. That part is simpler than the final part, which is going to be firmware and integration and making this new device work in the existing framework, from the instrumentation to the VMS module to the switch pack to all the rest of the things that are in the Roadster.
When they moved to the R80 battery packs, Tesla had to replace the DMC board. And so I can think that this is one area that Marco is going to have to try to deal with. He's probably not going to have the ability to just go in and replace the board. He's going to have to figure out what kind of firmware changes would be needed for the existing board.
Yeah, he's going to have to develop an emulation package that basically provide a translation between the existing firmware and hardware, or the electronics, and this product.
Yes.
Now, one of the things he mentioned was, and I got another picture here, Jesse, if you can bring up the Gray Hill touch encoder. When I saw this, I realized I have something like this in my house. My Nest thermostat operates like this. And what he's talking about here is, he says that he's considering using this Gray Hill touch encoder to adjust the limits, but he's unsure of its placement, where he's going to put it inside the car.
Sure.
So anyway, this is one of those innovators that is continuing to keep the Roadster alive. And we spoke with him. I spoke with him this morning about being a podcast guest at some point in the future. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be able to get Marco Nolte on our podcast, and he can tell you a whole lot more about what kind of progress he's making with this battery pack. Now, to put it in perspective, Tesla is still making a replacement battery pack. One of the concerns that actually Marco raised was he was surprised that so many owners weren't concerned about the collectability of their cars by putting an aftermarket battery pack like this in their car. And, you know, what I find is you have your signature 100 and 250 type customers. You have low VIN customers, low mileage customers. And those cars are worth substantially more than your non-pedigreed Roadster.
Correct.
But there's also a large faction of Tesla Roadster owners that want to see a performance increase. And with a replacement pack like this, if you can shave weight and improve the performance, the KW performance, those are all things that might resonate with that crowd that isn't as concerned about originality. And if Tesla ever gets to the point where they stop making a replacement Tesla Roadster battery pack, then this could be a suitable solution. And then again, we get into that gray area. Will collectability be affected by an aftermarket pack? The other option that Marco has is to make this look like one of the original packs. He'll have to go to Thailand and find that barbecue manufacturer and
That's
get some
right.
skins
He sure
made
will.
for this.
You know, and I'm taking a little bit of time to look at the modules because this battery pack has 15 modules in it. They come from the Porsche Taycan. And I happen to see some of these coming up used as, you know, $700 to $900 per module. Okay, well, 15 modules at $900 a module is only $13,000 worth of battery. So you add the time to put together the frame, and after he gets his R&D, you'd have a firmware redeployment. He may end up with a battery pack that's very competitive price-wise with what Tesla could offer, and I think these battery packs are going to come in around 95 kilowatt hours instead of 80.
Interesting. And, you know, of anyone in the space that would be able to handle the integration of a product like this, Marco is one of the best candidates. That's what's been most perplexing to the rest of us out here in aftermarket, is developing a emulation package for newer type drivetrains to go in a Tesla Roadster. It's going to require a lot of software, firmware, programming, you know, all of that.
Yeah, it's going to require an awful lot of stuff. I see this as a potentially very significant development if it works, because it'll be one of the first really large scale or large value components in an electric vehicle that has been able to be successfully replaced by a third party instead of by the OEM.
I'm really looking forward to that podcast where he can give us a lot more detail.
Yeah, I am too.
TikTok, Acid Farmer says, who owns Gruber Motors? I do. LinkedIn, Renato Goncalves. Hi from Portugal. Well, thank you. You're a long ways away.
Welcome.
By the way, back to that ownership question, just briefly.
Yeah.
We the only business that that I started in 1995 with three partners, three partners. Yeah. I found that I don't work well with partners. I don't know, maybe it's my personality, whatever it was. So, these four divisions here are solely owned. And the other thing that we like is we're not beholden to anyone. We don't have VC money. We don't have venture capitalists. We don't have outstanding loans. We grow on cash flow. And it's a very simple philosophy here. It's the same one that I use at home. I don't spend money I don't have. It's that simple. There's a simple rule. People always ask, well, how can I be rich? It's very simple. Spend less than you make.
That's right.
And you will always have money, and
That's
it will
right.
grow. And then invest. Take some risk. You
Yeah,
know?
take the time to get what money you have growing passively. That's the key for the people who have money, is that their money is working for them. They're not working for their money. And spend less than you make. If you want to get rich faster, make more. Keep your spending the same.
Right. But thank you for asking, Acid Farmer. Facebook, Ross Couples asks, I'm curious if the new Roadster found in containers overseas ended up back in the U.S. and what the effects of being new and unused for so long might have on these cars. We actually talked about that a little bit earlier, but I will reiterate. We found out just this morning, actually, from the sellers, that the cars are currently docked off of Vietnam in the Pacific Ocean. Because of the threat of storms, tropical storms, or even hurricane, they opted not to continue to Long Beach until things settled. The ship is now scheduled to arrive September 5th. We don't know whether September 5th is going to be an unloading day because we're thinking with all of this tropical storm activity, there may be more ships waiting to unload and there's going to be a long line of them. So we're not 100% certain yet what the forecast will be when they finally get unloaded at Long Beach.
Right. And I was thinking too, not only did we have Hillary that went up the western United States and Mexico coast, there was Hurricane Dora that affected Hawaii, but actually headed north and went right through the shipping lanes. And that's probably the main tropical storm that delayed this boat, not Hillary.
Right. Okay. So I have another image you can pop up, Jesse. It's called Jesse James pick. Also a Jesse. Now, you're probably familiar with Jesse James on this motorcycle series where they build choppers. And I can't for the life of me think of the name of it now. I wish I had written it down here. Well, anyway, Jesse James posted this picture on Instagram, and he provided some quotes. He said, "Oh yes, before I forget, remember those super cool Tesla Roadsters they first built? When was the last time you saw one of those on the road? They're all gone, in the scrap heap. When they say sustainable energy, they really just mean keeping that cash flow sustainable." Well, I'm beginning to sense that there's a bit of sarcasm there and that he's not a complete supporter of electric vehicles. So we go on here.
Right.
And he then says, "Hey, I wanted to just take a minute and congratulate you on your new Tesla purchase." Now that's dripping with sarcasm, right?
Right,
There's obviously
right.
a Tesla's on fire here, right? "It's really awesome that you care so much about the climate change that you would choose an EV as your mode of transportation. You really are fixing the planet. Now, before I blurt out, 'I'm never buying a Tesla piece of crap,' let me inundate with some facts that prove that your hard work is buying every single EV turd and all, and charging infrastructure and the charging." I'm not quite sure what the last part of that means, but he's obviously angry about EVs.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
I get that, all right? Then he goes into history. He says, "Way back in 2003, when Tesla was running around in prototypes, I was knee-deep in filming Monster Garage. Tesla founders Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning managed to piss off every single mainstream car media outlet by not letting them test or have any long-term loaner cars for automotive journalists." Well, I'm not sure that I would want to give my Tesla Roadster to an automotive journalist who's going to do donuts in the parking lot as soon as he gets out of my sight.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, all right. But there are, of course, plenty of other manufacturers that feel that even the donuts part might be something that helps them sell cars. Well, Tesla chose not to do that. All right. And he's mad about that. All right. Then he says, "I was suspect from the start. Moves like that usually mean only one thing. The car is crap, and they don't want to risk the bad press, especially if you're looking for outside cash to bankroll your deal." Well, this is a Roadster owner podcast, and we all know that the Tesla Roadster is not crap. We know that they are relatively reliable, and that it is an extraordinarily successful car that started the EV revolution. But we're going to have a talk with Jesse about that.
Yeah, just a little bit. I actually went and fact-checked some of these numbers that he was putting out. Jesse mentioned that Tesla received $465 million from Obama, and that was just the tip of the cash iceberg. So I checked on this. Did Tesla receive $465 million from the U.S. government? Did the implication here is that the government gave Tesla back in 2009, $500 million.
Like a grant.
Yeah, like a grant or something like that. Well, there is a fact to this, in that Tesla did get, in January of 2010, $465 million from the U.S. government. It was part of the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program, and it was a loan, not a grant, not a gift. So this loan was fully repaid by Tesla 9 years ahead of its maturity date in May of 2013.
With interest.
With interest. With
Okay.
interest. So here are some other recipients of this same loan. Ford, 5.937 billion.
Not
million.
Yeah, billion.
Yeah,
All right.
so it's like 5,937 million instead of 465 million. That loan has not yet been repaid. It's still in repayment. Nissan, 1.448 billion. Now, Nissan has repaid their loan. They repaid early as well. They repaid in 2017. Fisker Automotive. Now, this is the early edition of Fisker.
First generation.
This is the first generation because Henrik Fisker went bankrupt. He had taken a $529 million loan. Then the company went bankrupt in 2013. That loan was wiped off the books and was never repaid. Now, there are a couple of other companies that went bankrupt around this time period, about the time that these loans were being given out. And I just have to throw that in for a little bit of color and context. And, you know, I'm a kind of a numbers guy.
Right.
You have Fiat Chrysler. It's $17.6 billion from the U.S. government. It was not a loan. It was a bailout because they went bankrupt. And so it was never repaid to the U.S. government. That's one of the reasons that Stellantis now owns Chrysler, because Fiat ended up getting out of the business of owning Chrysler. But the granddaddy of them all, General Motors, $50.35 billion with a B. And of course, because GM went through its own bankruptcy around this 2010, 2011 time, was never repaid as well. They received a $50 billion handout from the U.S. government. That is somewhere around 110 times the size of the loan that Tesla got, and GM didn't repay it. Tesla did.
Mm-hmm. Interesting facts. All right, so Jesse definitely has to get some better fact checkers, it sounds like. But he continues here. He said, and he's talking about the bad press that they didn't give. Let me continue. He says, I was suspect from the start. Moves like that usually mean one thing. The car was a crap box. All right. And they didn't want to reveal that. Then he says, that's when they found the do-gooder Elon Musk to invest big and become a majority shareholder. Fast forward to 2009. And then, like you said, Tesla received a $500 million loan from Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's saying Tesla is now on track to receive $41 billion in clean energy subsidies throughout 2032. That's $7,500 of your tax dollars for every single Tesla.
Okay, yeah, and I want to add to that too. Again, provide a little bit of color. First, the $7,500 that he's referring to, that is the consumer's $7,500 tax credit for buying an electric vehicle that is built in the United States with United States parts. Mm-hmm. It's part of the Inflation Reduction Act that the U.S. Congress passed and President Biden signed into law. On top of that, I did learn that there are some facts in here. Tesla and Panasonic, as the manufacturers of the battery for the majority of Tesla's vehicles, are on track at their current rate to receive almost $41 billion in government subsidies or kickbacks, however you want to put it, by 2032. So he says 41 billion. Yeah, that's probably a real number, and they are considered subsidies. It's $45 per kilowatt hour of the battery pack. When a car gets a $7,500 credit or the half credit, the $3,750 credit, the manufacturer will get $45 per kilowatt hour of energy back to themselves. Mm-hmm. Tesla, obviously, they sell more than half of all vehicles that are electrified in the United States, so they're getting more than half of the money. But that also means that other manufacturers like General Motors and Ford, are getting a big share of this subsidy money as well. In fact, General Motors and Ford are probably set to get about $20 billion at their rates of manufacture between now and 2032 as well. So the whole idea is that the U.S. government, as many governments throughout the world are doing, is trying to push for people to get electric vehicles. They're trying to incentivize consumers to buy them with a $7,500 tax credit. They're trying to incentivize manufacturers to build them with all kinds of tax credits for the building of these same cars.
Mm-hmm.
It's not limited to Tesla. It is for anyone who wants to get into the business. And I think that's also part of the reason why you're seeing so many people get into the business.
Right, right. So anyway, Jesse James continues. He says, and we're going to see a bit more sarcasm here. So congrats on your EV purchase. And just so you all know, the manufacturers in the EV business are doing the same and getting that free government cheese. Okay, enough about Tesla, he says. Let's talk about where the big money is and the real reason for all the fake EV climate change BS. Energy sellers. So anyway, it's pretty clear to me that Jesse James, with this motorcycle build shop that went pretty popular, I think, on, was it Netflix? It was one of those shows, I think, or one of those.
I think so.
Yeah. My favorite comment here, based on this post that he put out on Instagram, was from the Travel Guy 1. And he says, "You're speaking like an expert on something you know nothing about. It would be like me criticizing you as a bike maker." Ditto. Bingo. He nailed it.
He sure did.
So, Jesse, love to have you on our podcast. Love to have you, battle us here. And we'll talk about climate change. We'll talk about the EV manufacturers, and we'll put some reality back into these allegations that you made.
I understand that there is a government push for electric vehicles. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and I was ranting about it a little bit yesterday. That government push is, I think, necessary to get the traction necessary for people to begin to accept electric vehicles. You look back 100 years ago, electric vehicles were roughly a 50-50 with gasoline-powered vehicles. The reason gas-powered vehicles ended up winning out and taking over is Henry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because he didn't like electric vehicles, it's because he wanted to sell cars.
Right.
And so his car, Model T, was affordable. It was about a third the cost of electric vehicles at the time. It worked, and it was reliable, but there was no more gasoline infrastructure out there in the world in the early 1900s than there is electric infrastructure today. It was not an infrastructure issue. It was a dollars and cents issue.
Mm-hmm.
He found an excellent product that costs less. Well, at some point, these EVs, I think, are going to do the same thing. They have inherent advantages in repairability, in simplicity, and so eventually, I think, in reliability, we're already seeing some of that are going to be better than what the ICE vehicles have. When you add to that the lower costs, the quantities of scale are going to eventually afford, you're going to see the same type of thing. People will start adopting EVs, not because they're electric, but because they're a better vehicle for the same or lower price than they can get from gasoline.
Exactly. That's the tipping point that we're all waiting for.
Yeah, at that point, the tipping point hits, and then it doesn't matter if there are government subsidies or not.
Right. Jesse, got a picture, Roadster for sale. We got we listed another Roadster this morning. Actually, Richard might be able to tell us a bit more about this one since he did the listing for this customer. Sunglasses?
Oh, hold.
Okay, there we go.
Is my mic working here? I can't
Yeah,
hear it
yeah,
through my
I can-
headphones. Okay.
I can hear you crystal clear.
All right, sunglasses are on. Yeah, so this one is in, this is a low VIN, 285 or 289. I'll have to double check that.
It is 289. I have it up here as well.
289.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, yeah.
Thunder gray and with low mileage as well. There isn't any story on this just yet. The owner is out of town and is going to provide a backstory to it with all the unique details that go along with the Tesla Roadster in the future. But yeah, he just threw it up. It's email at bid. He wants to see what kind of traction it gets at this point.
Okay, so this will be one that does not have a firm price, and if you want to email us your bid, we'll start posting. And Jesse has been working on the Roadster matchmaking site, making it more consistent with some of the auction sites that you guys go to. It'll still be free, but we're eventually going to get to a point where you can see the bids right by the car on the front page.
And 3,575 miles, that is definitely a low mileage Roadster. This is going to be a collectible car.
It is, yep. And we typically, as people list cars with us, we always encourage them to share the backstory. You know, what's the history on the car? Are you the first owner? And, with Roadsters, there's usually a story attached. It's very rare that you just get a vanilla response that, nothing special, just got it at the dealership and been driving it since.
We've talked about the passion of the Roadster customers. A few months ago, I did a little bit of looking on my own about why do people become so passionate about things?
Mm-hmm.
It's always the stories.
Yeah.
A story doesn't have the same significance all by itself as it does when there's an object attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the object of that story doesn't have significance unless there's a story for the object. When you have both, magic occurs sometimes. And that's why people, adults that are 50 or 60 years old go into their closet and pull out a stuffed animal that they had when they were a kid.
Right.
Or you have these photo albums and there's all the stories. Or you have cars that people just hold on to and treat as though they're children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or the stuff that people collect. They remember the flea market where they found that bargain.
Yes.
Or what the owner said where it came from. Death in the family, whatever it was, came from overseas, for example. The story attached to any of these inanimate objects typically takes it to a whole new level.
It does. It totally does.
All right, so the other thing I wanted to mention about this free Roadster matchmaking service that we have is we also have partners that relist our cars for sale. So there are times when you may see some of the cars that we have on our site that are also visible on another site. Well, you can explore either one, and we try to provide enough information so that these other sites can actually extract the information we have and tell the whole story. All right, got a couple more questions, and I think we're going to need to wrap up. Ross Couples asks, I'm curious, Pete, what is your daily driver? Well, I used to have a P90D Ludacris.
Yeah, Model S.
a year and a half ago. And
that one has a story too, doesn't it?
Oh, my God, the story on that. All right, let me start. I'll try to make it brief. I got this car as a flood damage car in 2017.
Yep. All
right. Came out here. It had flood damage. I remember the water got inside the cabin, and there was a connector, a wiring harness with two large 42-pin connectors buried in that water, badly corroded.
Yep.
Well, I was determined to make this car run. So I remember coming in 2 weekends, laying on that floor in that car, cutting those connectors off, and then tracing the wires. And they weren't just solid color wire, white, red, blue, black.
Yeah.
They were white with orange stripe, white with red stripe, And the other part, this was insane, I didn't realize until after I reconnected everything that Tesla switched the colors. For whatever reason. I have no idea why. So now, fortunately, I had taken pictures of the old cable, and I had to do detective work and trace back to see where the swaps were and then rewire that.
Yes.
And we eventually got it running. In fact, one of the gentlemen that we mentioned earlier on this show, Marco Nolte in Germany, was the software developer that actually helped me get that car running.
Okay.
Well, I love that car. 0 to 60 was 2.9 seconds. I've never driven anything that fast. I had a Dodge ACR Viper, by the way. That wasn't even that fast. That was 3.3 seconds. So anyway, that car, we used to take it out when visitors came, and everybody loved doing a ludicrous launch. I would get these guys that come to our from corporate America, suits and all that, very serious. And I would get them in the car because they wanted to experience a Tesla. I would go up here to Deer Valley Road, and as soon as I did that ludicrous launch, these guys were stamping their feet and giggling like schoolgirls.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It was a roller coaster ride, basically. Well, anyway, I let the car into the loaner pool, and we offer this service to our GMC customers. If they bring their car, we often give them a Tesla loaner. Well, someone took the car, and it conked out on them at their house, and the battery was bad.
Right.
Now, this is that old story about the cobbler's shoes, or the kids, the cobbler's kids, they never have shoes. It's the same thing here. There's always a customer that's more important than my car. So anyway, that's what happened to it. It's still sitting out there. It will be put back together at some point in time with a battery repair. But in the meantime, what do I drive every day? That was the question. We have so many Roadsters in-house, and I'm the only one that I trust to test drive Roadsters, and I'm very gentle. I live 7 miles away. I do charging cycles at my house, so I drive about 2 to 3 Roadsters each day. And I had a guy pull up at me. This was on my way to work many years ago, and he rolled down his window. I rolled down mine, and he says, "I know what you're doing," he says. "You have a vehicle wrap company. That's why I see you in a different color car every other week." But so those are my daily drivers these days. Love driving those Tesla Roadsters, even in this kind of heat.
You failed to mention, just like the cobbler or a carpenter or something like that. I remember you went in a couple months after you turned your car in to get in the queue for battery work, and the door handles were gone.
Yes.
And one of the seats was gone, and the frunk was gone, and and a window regulator was gone, and you're like, what in the heck is going on?
Totally, yeah.
We needed parts. We needed to take care of the customers.
And as much as I try to enforce a policy that this is not a parts car, there was always a customer that was more important than my car.
Yeah. I thought I had a blue S that I drove for several years, and it was having an MCU issue and a few others. So I graciously got a different car from the company to drive, and that blue S has now become a donor car for at least 5 other customers.
Really?
Or the MCU itself has been pulled, and it's now the bench MCU for the lab for testing for other customer cars.
One of the frustrations of being in the Tesla repair business. But, again, the customers win, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. That is what it's all about.
Yeah. Trucker Alistair says, Jesse James, another Hollywood movie BSer. All right.
Yes.
Very colorful, though. You have to admit, there's a lot of entertainment value there.
And then I think our last comment for today, again from George, when we're talking about the loans, you don't forget the loan that Elon asked for you to provide him to buy a bank.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole nother long story. But, my answer to that is Elon has become just like Santa Claus. He has a lot of helpers out there.
Yes.
All right, I think we're wrapping up here. We appreciate all of you joining us. We ran a little bit longer than we normally do. Tomorrow we will have our Thursday morning EV podcast, and Friday will be the Critical Power podcast for those of you interested in the other type businesses we're in. And then Sunday, Jesse and I will be here to chase down rabbit holes and talk about the implementation of artificial intelligence and the impact on our societies.
Look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Take care.
Thank you.